Go into the world and tell every man that you meet, there is a man on the cross.
A Catholic Take. What you need to know right now. A bold synthesis of inspiration and information. Keeping you up to date on the news and issues from a courageous Catholic perspective.
A Catholic Take with Joe McLean starts now.
Good morning. This is the day which the Lord hath made. Let us be glad and rejoice therein. Welcome to A Catholic Take, a bold synthesis of information and inspiration. It is Thursday, September 28th, 2023, and I am not Joe McLean. I am your guest host and humble servant, Mike Koeniger, and I have a question. Can we have sacramental marriage in modern times? That is what I'm going to talk about with Leane VanderPutten from finerfemininity.com. Say that 3 times real fast. At 1:15. At 1:30, we welcome back Michael Ippolito of the 1492 Project. And I'm hoping we can talk about the influences of Scottish Masonry or Freemasonry on the founding of our country. Perhaps what happened in Maryland to the formerly English Catholics colony, or anything else that might come up. I also want to remind you that next week is our fund drive. And so would be so grateful if you would support our network and our stations here at the Station of the Cross. Now let us begin in prayer in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thy intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, I fly unto thee, O Virgin of Virgins. My mother, to thee do I come. Before thee I stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer me. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. And now, Jacob, with your saint of the day.
Duke St. Wenceslaus I, pray for us. Wenceslaus, or Václav in Czech, was born in the early 10th century in the Duchy of Bohemia. His grandmother was Saint Ludmila of Bohemia, who was converted along with her husband by the great Saints Cyril and Methodius. When Wenceslaus was in his early teens, his father, the Duke of Bohemia, died in battle, and Saint Ludmila ruled as regent for the young heir. Wenceslaus's mother, however, was jealous of the situation and arranged the assassination of Saint Ludmila. Taking control as the new regent, she began a persecution of Christians, despite having been baptized when she married Wenceslaus's father. When the pious Wenceslaus came of age, the surviving Christian nobles overthrew his mother and rallied behind the young duke. Wenceslaus made the most of what would be a short reign, fighting back against paganism, promoting the traditional Roman rite, and strengthening relations with the Holy Roman Emperor Otto I. He took a vow of virginity and was known for his great charity and his devotion to assisting at Holy Mass. After only a few years of exemplary rule, Wenceslaus was invited to a feast by his brother Boleslaus to celebrate both Saints Cosmas and Damian and the birth of a son. Influenced by their pagan mother, Boleslaus killed Wenceslaus with his own hands on September 28, 935, and took control of Bohemia as Duke Boleslaus I. He soon repented of this terrible act and translated his brother's relics to the cathedral in Prague. Thanks no doubt to the intercession of St. Wenceslaus, the son and heir of the repentant Boleslaus would be known as Boleslaus the Pious, while one daughter became a great abbess, and another helped convert her husband, the King of Poland, along with his whole country. Wenceslaus himself was hailed as a martyr for the faith, with many miracles worked through his relics. To this day he remains a great patron of the Czechs, and he is memorialized in the carol, Good King Wenceslaus, a testament to his kingly bearing and true devotion to Christian charity. St. Wenceslaus, pray for us.
Indeed, pray for us. And now here are your headlines from Blaze Media. British Home Secretary enrages UN by telling Americans that misguided dogma of multiculturalism has failed. British Home Secretary Suella Braverman issued a blistering speech in Washington Tuesday denouncing the failed and outdated immigration policies that have compromised the stability, security, and sovereignty of Western nations. The conservative politician drew a parallel between the crisis at the U.S. southern border and in the Mediterranean, stressing in her American Enterprise Institute keynote address that uncontrolled immigration, inadequate integration, and a misguided dogma of multiculturalism have proven a toxic combination for the West. Braverman, born to migrants from Mauritius and Kenya, emphasized the integration of migrants into the culture of their newfound homelands, a feat she prides her parents on having achieved wholeheartedly. And by the way, the reason why I don't speak German, because my dad wanted us integrated fully into American culture. From the Wisconsin Daily, Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson reveals 2017 National Institute of Health records raising concerns about Wuhan lab. In 2017, a report from an official at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases raised red flags about the Wuhan Institute of Virology, according to internal records revealed this week by U.S. Senator Ron Johnson. It is clear to me by talking to the technician that certainly there is a need for training support, Dr. Ping Chen, an NIAID official, wrote in a report about the controversial laboratory suspected of unleashing COVID-19 on the world. Johnson, ranking member of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, sent out a letter this week to Health and Human Services Secretary Xavier Becerra and NIH Acting Director Lawrence Tabak, reiterating multiple requests for an interview with Chen. And from the Ohio Star, the Ohio Republican Party poll shows Democrats overwhelmingly want zero restrictions on abortion up to the moment of birth. The Ohio Republican Party Straw X poll last week detailed that 71.4% of individuals surveyed said that Ohio Democratic officials and abortion lobbyists want to remove all legal restrictions to abortion in Ohio. The poll shows that U.S. Senator Sherrod Brown garnered about 18% of the vote. Brown voted against the pain-capable Onboard Child Protection Act to protect unborn children from late-term abortion after 5 months of pregnancy, as well as voted to eliminate or prevent protections for children born alive after failed abortions, and voted in favor of allowing Ohioans' tax dollars to be used for elective abortions. And those are your headlines, not good ones either. Now for today's gospel. From the Gospel of Luke, chapter 9, verses 7 and 9. Meanwhile, Herod the Tetrarch had heard about all that was going on, and he was puzzled, because some people were saying that John had risen from the dead, others that Elijah had reappeared, and still others that one of the ancient prophets had come back to life. But Herod said, "John, I beheaded him. So who is this I hear such reports about?" And he was anxious to see him. The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. A really short gospel today, but a really powerful one. And I read this last night preparing for the show, and I was immediately caught by the idea of kind of a Buddhist belief in reincarnation that was behind some of the messaging in this gospel, thinking that John the Baptist, who Herod had actually incorporated capital punishment on, had come back to life. And so I did some research and looked around a bit. And let's remember that Herod, of course, beheaded St. John after his stepdaughter had danced for him at a birthday banquet, and he had promised the young lady up to half of everything he had. And her mother had persuaded her to ask for the head of John because John had been condemning the mom of being an adulteress. So Herod really wanted to meet Jesus, having heard about this. And of course, we all know from the story that he ends up seeing Jesus as Pilate tries to get out from under a passing judgment on Jesus and sending him to Herod. Our records show, or Josephus records, that Herod was the ruler of both Perea and Galilee, and that his palace was located near the Sea of Galilee in Tiberias. And they debate whether this party that led to John's being killed, whether it took place in Machaerus or the palace in Tiberias, since those in attendance were his courtiers, his military officers, and the leading men of Galilee. But like most rulers, Herod's entourage traveled with him, so it's not a modern thing that all the entourage follows along. Herod had those folks. So his capital city was not in Jerusalem, but it was in Galilee, and it's not inconceivable that most of the officers of his courts would have been Galileans, like his steward Chusa, whose wife Joanna was a disciple of our Lord and supported his ministry. So it may be from Joanna and Chusa that we know about how John was executed. So going deeper into it, and as I was reading along, I started to ponder on what had gone on and why would they think that John had been reincarnated. And of course, it appears that some Jews, and Herod himself, believed in kind of a metapsychosis or transmigration of souls. Josephus goes on to say that the Pharisees, of course, and we know this because they believed in the soul to be immortal, and after death it would depart and go to some subterraneous place where where souls receive recompense of good or evil according to their actions, so a judgment, so to speak. There the souls of the wicked remain forever without the power of departing from there, and the souls of the good sometimes returned and entered other bodies. Herod probably thought that the soul of John the Baptist was united to that of our Lord Jesus Christ in the same body, and hence enabled to perform new and more extraordinary functions. So this is kind of the thoughts of some of the rabbis in that time. And of course, you know, if you get three rabbis together, you get three different varying opinions regarding any issue you want to pick on. So St. Jerome goes on and remarks that the abused passages of the gospel the abused passages of the gospel would then go to support this Pythagorean doctrine. So most of the Jews believe the true doctrine of the resurrection, that of the body, which must one day be renewed to life by the same soul which now animates it. And that is the doctrine of faith and of our church, which she teaches us in both the Old and New Testament, instead of transmigration or some other form of reincarnation of souls that has no foundation in the or appearance of truth. It is this error that was widely diffused in the time of our Lord. So, a powerful gospel. I have not done it justice, but I'm really glad we even got to talk about it. When we come back from the break, we're going to talk about sacramental marriage and how we can do it in our modern times. See you on the other side. Welcome back to the show. We have a lot to cover today, and I am always happy to discuss the roles of men and women in a Catholic family. I know with the pressures of modernism, many of us are concerned what's going to go on in our world. And here to discuss strong sacramental marriage with me is Leane VanderPutten, a Catholic wife and mother. And listen to this. She has been married to her husband, Vincent, for over 30 years. They have 11 children and 39 grandchildren, and that number of grandchildren is growing. Her website is finerfemininity.com, and I am very glad to welcome Leane. How are you this morning?
Thank you, Mike. I'm doing fine. Thank you.
Oh, it's an exciting talk. And so I was perusing your website in preparation for the show, and I see you have these wonderful, wonderful book lists. So I'm going to throw you a softball right out of the gate. If you know a young man's getting married and he's marrying a good Catholic girl, maybe he met her at a wonderful traditional church and did a proper courtship, and now they're getting married. Which of that long list of books would be the first one you'd say, hey, pick this book up and read it?
Right. So I like Father Kelly's book. He's got one that's called The Catholic Marriage Manual, and then he's got one called The Catholic Family Handbook. There's two of those. They're both very good. They're both named exactly the same, The Catholic Family Handbook. One is by Father Levasic, one is by Father Kelly. And I think I would give him Father Kelly's and Father Levasic's books.
All right. And the bride, what would be the first book you'd want her to read?
I mean, definitely those, but then there is one by Father Leo Kinsella. It's called The Wife Desired. And I think he did a really good job with that because he teaches the woman to appreciate her husband, to support him. And he's really good about talking about inspiration and how we need to inspire our husbands. And I think he touches on a lot of great subjects. I've used it through the years. I have all of it on my website. And so I think that would be a good book.
Oh, absolutely. And I think we should, Jake will put it up in the show notes so we can find your website, finerfemininity.com. It's a great site. There's a lot of resources there. and it's almost information overload. You've put so much stuff on there, it's hard to kind of pick out the gems, but it's better to have too much information than not enough. So I think, what really intrigues me about this whole topic, and I know it intrigues Joe because he and I have spoken about it in the past, is how does a traditional marriage survive with all this modernity, say that 3 times, going on, and how do we fall into the roles that our Creator gave us? I mean, He designed us to fill these roles by making us male and female from the beginning of time. So how do we, as good Catholics, continue to grow our marriage? I'm getting ready to celebrate my 18th anniversary with my wife. Joe's, of course, off celebrating his 23rd anniversary with his wife. So, and I know you're laughing because we're rookies compared to your 30 plus years. But how do you continue to foster that relationship and grow that good Catholic relationship in the sacrament of marriage?
So definitely, it does take grace. I don't know how people of the world do it and stick it out. And actually, we've been married 38 years now, and we have 44 grandchildren. So it's growing. And one thing we've always done was the family rosary, and we make that a priority. It's not always been perfect. A lot of times, my husband, he works late, and I had a bunch of little children, so we would do the rosary without him. But always we knew his spirit was there. He would be saying the rosary on the road or whatever. But we did, for the most part, make it a family rosary. And I just really feel that it was because of that. Like Father Peyton says, a family that prays together stays together. And I do think that because, we've had tough times, we've had the bumps, and looking back, it's like, okay, what is it that held us together and, gave us the grace? I have 7 married children, and they all say the daily rosary, and that's huge. They were given that habit. And anyway, that draws grace into the family. And I think it's very important for a husband and wife, because we may not be the best communicators. We all have our faults, but the rosary gives us that grace to overcome those, along the way. And so that would be my first advice, is do the daily rosary, because we need the grace.
I love it, and amen. When we pray the rosary, our Blessed Mother comes into our presence, and she's there holding us up, and we need that. And
right.
Leanne, I'm going to share with you, my wife and I are in the process of adopting a beautiful little 2.5-year-old boy. He's my golden years plan. And last night, right after I'd been on your website, I went in with him to help put him down, because he's always a little fidgety until he sees his papa. He calls me Papa. And so I came in and I sat with him, and I was holding him, and I said, "Can I pray with you?" And he always says, yeah. And so I pray the rosary with him before he goes to sleep. Yeah. And so I think, and I tell you all that because there is a question woven in here. How important do you think it is for children to hear their father pray? We hear lots of moms pray, and there's a long tradition of moms praying over their children. But how important is it for a father to pray over his sons and daughters and help them with their formation?
Right. Definitely the father has a huge impact. I've read statistics. If the mother has faith, how many of the children will have faith? If the father has faith, how many children? It's always more with the father. So I just, even though, I'm going to go by personal experience. My husband is a prayerful person. He wasn't always there for the prayers, but the kids would see that when he was there, he was taking part wholeheartedly. He made sure, did you say your rosary? He would bless the kids at night. Now that has kind of fallen by the wayside, but then I have older children now, but he would bless the children at night, because we did read that in a good Catholic book, that you use some holy water and bless them on the forehead. That's another good thing. I really feel that the husband, the father, needs to be, even though he may not be there all the time, but he needs to be that spiritual head that, all of us in the family are working together. And even though he's, not present sometimes, we just know that if he could, he would be. He would walk in sometimes and we were praying the rosary and he'd be right there with us, kneel down right away. And another thing too is my husband's been very involved in the Legion of Mary, and he's gotten the kids involved with that too. So they see that the Catholic faith is the foundation of my husband's life. And I think, that's huge with the success of what we've had with our children. So it's a working together with definitely the father right on board.
Oh, I know it is. I know it is. And I, too, have read the statistics and read the studies. And fathers who take their children to church raise Christian men and women. And it's important. And moms, God bless you all. You do the most important job in the world and are the most important half of our species. But moms, you need the help of a man to get your children to stay in the church. Yes. I'm the eldest of 6. My dad is a deacon. He was a former seminarian who decided he wanted to have a family. And while all of us don't have great church attendance, we're all Catholics and practicing Catholics to a large degree. So I think it speaks very well to your experiences as well. Now, full disclosure, and if for folks who haven't heard my story, I left the church for 40 years, but he prayed and I did come back eventually. So, but I there's another thing that really caught my eye, and before we run out of time, because we just have a few minutes here left, 7 minutes here left, I wanted to talk about something else you touch on, and it hit me right in the heart, Leane. This young man I was telling you about earlier came into our lives about little over 2 years ago, and he we've not had a date in 2 years, and we're going to have our first date in 2 years this coming Saturday. How important is courtship after the marriage? And can you talk about that a little bit with us?
I can. I think it's very important. My husband is self-employed and very busy. And so, I would suggest that if you can keep that up, I think weekly might be a bit much if you have a growing family, or, if you just, like my husband was never an 8 to 5 person. So, it was just a lot of just survival, scrambling type of thing. So the once a week wasn't a reality for us, but you have to connect some way, somehow. You have to, and it doesn't have to be something that is extravagant. You don't even necessarily have to leave the home, like you can take a walk together or whatever. The communication is very important. Touch base about the kids. And if you can pull away and do a date night, I think that's a wonderful thing to do. And it will only strengthen your marriage bond. And, you think about it. I mean, the most important thing, or that we love our children so much and we want the best for them. And we do everything we can to give them the best, whether it's homeschooling or saying the daily rosary. I really feel that the marriage bond, like the relationship between you and your husband, is the greatest gift you can give your children. Because if they can see, and it's not going to be perfect, but if they can see two people working together, they're going to want what you have. Whereas if you're always bickering, or just like two people growing apart, they're not going to want that. And so I think, and not only that, I believe that bond is something that they see and just really helps their security and helps them to grow.
So not only role modeling faith and strong faith and dads and moms taking their kiddos to church every Sunday and not only praying together as a family, but also being the role model for what a good Catholic marriage looks like for your children. Those are all critical things. And I'm trying to very quickly summarize because you hit so many just huge points right in that little nugget of information. And by the way, Leane, a date night doesn't have to be going out, does it? You can go hide in a room, watch a movie together, and maybe have some quiet time together, right? So if you're one of those young You're one of those young Catholic families that I see in church. And by the way, I'm so jealous that they were so much smarter at their age than I was at their age. And they have 10 kids across the pew, and they're all like 11 to 1. Yeah. You may not be able to afford to go out, but you can afford to go somewhere else in the home or take a walk across the backyard or something and have some alone time together, right?
Oh, definitely. And I know my kids do that. They'll hide in their room and have their movie together and some popcorn. They put a movie on for their children's movie on for their kids, and they're just able to have some quiet time.
It is so important. Leanne, you have so much to give us and so much great advice. I suggest strongly that everyone go visit Leanne's website, finerfemininity.com. I'm sure if you reach out to Leanne, she'd love to talk with you. Leanne, I am so thrilled you're here. Thank you so much for being the guest this morning and my first go in a while here for Joe. Some great nuggets of wisdom. So take your kids to church, Dad and Mom. Pray together, Dad and Mom. And wouldn't it be wonderful if your kids ever caught you and your wife or you and your husband praying together without them? That would probably be another way to get in there. And so, Leanne, thank you again. And we're so blessed to have had you this morning.
Thank you, Mike.
On the other side, we're going to talk to our friend Michael Ippolito about the 1492 Project.
This is Jim Havens, host of The Simple Truth. The Catechism states that those who die in God's grace and friendship and are perfectly purified live forever with Christ. They are like God forever, for they see him as he is face to face. That's why the theme of our fall appeal is Heaven is Our Home. You can support the appeal now by calling 1-877-711-8500, weekdays 8 to 5 p.m. Eastern, visiting thestationofthecross.com, using the donation page of your iCatholic Radio mobile app, or returning the envelope from our fall appeal mailing. You can also donate during the on-air appeal, which will take place October 2nd through October 6th from 7 to 7 Eastern Time. Regardless of when or how you donate, you'll be eligible to receive our special thank you gifts. You can also take advantage of our prayer wall at thestationofthecross.com. Thank you for your financial support, and thank you for prayerfully supporting each other through our prayer wall. God bless you.
Welcome back. Here is the news from the Hill. Montana judge blocks state ban on gender-affirming care for trans youth. A Montana district court judge has blocked the state from enforcing its ban on gender-affirming health care for transgender minors, adding to a growing list of Republican-led states that have had such bans halted by court orders. 2 transgender minors, their parents, and 2 pediatric endocrinologists, and I picked this story, by the way, so I can only blame me for the words, sued Montana in May, alleging in a lawsuit filed in Missoula County that the new law, Senate Bill 99, would violate their rights under the state constitution if it is allowed to take effect. District Judge Jason Marks granted a preliminary injunction Wednesday. He wrote in his opinion that Senate Bill 99 is unlikely to survive any level of constitutional review, and barring access to gender-affirming care would negatively impact gender dysphoric minors' mental and physical health. Oh, imagine that. So we mutilate them. Anyway, the next story. Vermont town is banning influencers and tourists from visiting its fall foliage. And I've lived in many tourist towns. I know where they're coming from, but they also love the dollars, don't they? A Vermont town known for its autumn foliage has closed its roads to the public for the season, citing an overwhelming amount of influencer tourists. The Select Board of Pomfret voted to close Cloudland Road and Barber Hill Road to non-residents from September 23rd to October 15th, which is, by the way, peak season. That also blocks access to the popular Sleepy Hollow Farm, a private residence that many of the tourists try to visit. Foliage season traffic in this area has steadily increased during the last several years, causing a significant safety, environmental, aesthetic, and quality of life issues, the Select Board wrote in the memo. A Pomfret resident suggested that tourists looking for picturesque foliage travel elsewhere. You can just drive up Interstate 89, which is our north-south thruway, and have a beautiful drive. And those are your headlines. Before we go to our next great guest, I want to give a quick shout out to our iCatholic Radio 300 Club and to our Telegram insiders. I thank both of you all for being here and supporting us on the back end. It's just great to have you. And I wanted to remind you, we will have an after show today and tomorrow, and you can find links to join us on the Station of the Cross. Now, don't pluralize it. It's thestationofthecross.com/ACT, and I'll give you all the links to get to our after show. But I'm really excited to talk to Michael Ippolito of the 1492 Project. He has posts on AmericanPostLiberal.substack.com. I read a bunch of those as well last night. And so Michael is the co-founder and president of the American Post Liberal. Michael graduated from the Catholic University of America, which I believe is in my hometown of Washington, D.C. He is published in Daily Signal, MRC TV, and A Lone Conservative. Welcome back to the show, Michael. I am so thrilled to get to speak with you. How are you this morning?
I'm well, Mike. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, Joe asked right after you were on the show last time, he said, I know you're filling in for me. Would you like to have Michael back? And I was like, absolutely, absolutely. So in my former life, I was a history teacher. So I think you and I have a lot to discuss. And you have no clue where I'm going to take us. So I hope you play along with us, and we'll just see how it goes. How's that sound?
No, this is going to be a fun conversation.
Great. So I read through a few of your articles, I think three or four of them, the one that Joe talked to you about, and then I went on and read the article about the influence of Scottish Freemasonry on the founding of America. You had a lot of conversation within that about our one of our founding fathers, George Washington, and his faith. And so if you don't mind, let's talk about some of the faith of these folks, and then we can talk about the Maryland Catholic influence after that, which I think was kind of emasculated by our founding fathers, but that's a preview to where we're going. So can you tell us a little about George Washington? And was he a deist? Was he an Anglican? Was he kind of a hodgepodge of the two? What do you think?
Yeah, so historically, George Washington leaned much more into the deist camp than by the Anglican camp. He obviously believed in a supernatural creator. It's obvious in his rhetoric it was that. But it was very common practice not to overtly mention Jesus Christ or overtly mention God. So Washington fell into that camp. He believed less so in one version of Christianity and a pluralistic view of Christianity. He would attend Catholic services, Anglican services, Baptist services all throughout the United States. So Washington necessarily wasn't devout to one sect of Christianity. One belief system that he did hold dearly was his Freemason beliefs. He went in as a young man and became head of his lodge, and he really subscribed to the Masonic ideas of fraternity, of rationalism, and those really struck a chord with him, and he incorporated it into his rhetoric. These ideas that, if you take a look at his writings, you have him refer back to ideas such as providence. And while providence is a very Catholic term, it's also a very deist term because it's this idea of a vague creator moving around, and that watchmaker version of God instead of the active incarnational God that underpins the Christian and Catholic faith. Washington was more subscribed to this vague providence deist version of Christianity. And I think we see that today, that Washington's religious legacy, it's very split. You have some beautiful paintings of Washington praying at Valley Forge, or you have Washington's proclamation for prayer in the United States, but you also have in Alexandria, Virginia, you have Washington's Masonic Temple, and you have numerous paintings of and moments of history that show that Washington was very involved with Freemasons. And as you know, Freemasonry is condemned by the Catholic Church. It's been condemned since. It's been condemned by Pope Leo XIII, and it was even condemned by Pope Benedict XVI. So it is a very common practice for the Catholic Church to be opposed to Freemasons. So as Catholics, it provides some complexity to really understanding the founding of the United States.
Right. And we're not talking about the shrine hospitals or any of those things. We're talking about the basic tenets behind Freemasonry, where we have a grand architect of the universe, is what they call God, who, as you said, is the watchmaker, and then just kind of built his creation and shoved it down the road to see what would happen, like an experiment or something. And I want to remind folks, when we talk Anglicans 18th century style, we're talking a very high and very traditional church. They essentially kept many of the Catholic tenets and just got rid of the Pope and pushed that to the side and liberalized divorce. But we're still talking a very conservative faith. So Washington would have been kind of on the outlier of Anglican faith at the time, Michael, would you say? Or he was kind of a radical within the Anglican community?
Well, I think Washington was conservative in the American perspective, compared to people like Thomas Jefferson or Thomas Paine or Franklin. He much more lined up with Alexander Hamilton and John Adams in that level of conservatism. Religiously, it might be harder to say. Maybe he tended much more to that liberal aspect of the faith in terms of not necessarily really internalizing those Anglican principles. I think he subscribed to that much more pluralistic view of religion, and that religion was good, but it didn't really matter what you believed as long as you believed something. I think that would be the better characterization of Washington's beliefs, more so than just say, oh yeah, he was an Anglican. Yeah, that's what he was baptized as, but what he practiced was much more of this Masonic deism that was very common in the United States this time. It was common over Europe, but it became especially common in the United States, mostly because it provided first it provided some fraternity for people to join in, but it also had these ideas of rationalism that were very popular, especially after the 16th century in Europe.
Right. And great points all in. And to your point, Washington was probably more conservative than some of the other founding fathers, particularly in relation to Thomas Jefferson. And then, of course, we have John Adams, whom, if I remember correctly, was a Unitarian, which is not the modern Unitarian church either, but it was a universal salvation church, if I remember correctly. Am I right there?
Yeah, and it also provides some theological problems because both John Adams and John Quincy Adams rejected the Trinity. Right. And as a faithful Catholic, you have to say that's a problem. It is very hard for Catholics in today they don't really understand, or they really fail to recognize that there are some theological differences and theological problems with the faith of the founding fathers. And it did influence the founding of the United States. And we need to just take a holistic view, and we recognize the bad, but we also recognize the good there. Because while people like John Adams and George Washington had theological practices that we would consider to be heretical or ill-informed, they actually harken back a lot, not their heretical beliefs, but in their politics, they harken back to ideas of government that supersede their Protestant beliefs. Ideas such as a mixed regime or emphasis on the common good, unalienable rights are all ideas that have much more of a tradition in classic Western political thought and Catholic political thought than Protestant political thought. So I think you have to take a holistic view. You can't just say totally condemn everything. I don't think that's necessarily a good thing to do. I think you need to recognize that there is a lot of good there that we can build off of, but we just have to first, with anything, like before you go into confession, before you admit your sin, you have to recognize that there is something bad there before you can go on and make amends and be better.
Oh, and I think to your point, we do laud these men. I really am not trying to attack any of them. I'm simply trying to point out the flaws that they have. And that brings me to a place that I lived a great deal of my life in as a young man, Maryland, which was originally founded as a Catholic colony by the Baltimores, Lord Baltimore and Lord Calvert, their family. But they changed very radically in the ensuing time because of the pressures from the South, where I currently live in Virginia. And you have the Carrolltons the Carrolls of Carrollton, who are very involved in the founding of our country. And if I recall, and Michael, please correct me if I'm mistaken, but even though they were Catholic, weren't they also Freemasons?
To my knowledge, no. I don't think the Carrolls were Freemasons. Charles Carroll, obviously the first Catholic signer of the Declaration of Independence, he essentially went with the American experiment because he thought it was the best interest for Catholics. So Catholics during the Revolutionary War were divided into three sects. You had the Loyalists, who supported the monarch because of things like the Quebec Act, which gave toleration to Catholics. You had those Catholics in the middle that kind of were just going along to get along, waiting for what they believed to be another civil war to end, and then they would just go along with their normal lives. And then you had the Catholics who supported the patriots in the Revolutionary War because they believed it would be in their best interest to ensure their toleration, because Catholics were facing intense discrimination in the colonies. And Carroll was in the latter. He was one of those patriots who supported America's cause just because he believed it would give Catholics the greatest amount of toleration in the United States. And even his brother, one of the bishops in America, John Carroll, he actually was friends with founders like Benjamin Franklin, and because of those, for their close relationships with the people who would sign the Declaration of Independence and lay the groundwork for the U.S. Constitution, because of that, Catholics were given much more, a little bit more toleration. They obviously experienced massive biases against them, especially in the nativist movements. But I wouldn't say that they were Masons. They were just tolerant and pluralist more than anything.
Right, and embrace the idea of the Masonic experiment in the Americas of our classically liberal Constitution that would come in the future. So on the other side, I'd love to continue this discussion and talk about how this continues to influence our country's founding and early growth period by going up through Lincoln. So Michael Ippolito is here with us with the 1492 Project. And when we get on the other side, we're going to continue to explore this really fascinating subject. I think it's important that we remember, while I am a great lover of my nation and my country, we were not born without flaws. We made some mistakes, and we're going to talk more about Michael about this on the other side. So see you after the break for this fascinating discussion. Welcome back to A Catholic Take, a bold synthesis of information and inspiration. And we are talking with Michael Ippolito of the 1492 Project about some of the beliefs of our founding fathers. And we haven't talked about founding mothers yet, Michael, but you never know where this conversation may go. And so we talked a bit about the beliefs of George Washington and the Carrolls of Carrollton in Maryland, our Catholic forebears. And then we also kind of touched a little bit on John Adams. But, Michael, I'd like to now explore probably the most radical two, which would be probably Jefferson and Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine, I hear atheists often hold up as the first rational atheist in American history. Would you agree with that assessment of him? Or maybe they overplaying their hand a little bit?
No, 100%. Thomas Paine was more radical than Thomas Jefferson in many of his beliefs. I believe there's a anecdote story of, if you read Common Sense, there is it's almost ironic, and it shows his lack of understanding of these theological ideas. But he cites First Kings, and he cites the Israelis calling for a king, God saying, oh, you don't want a king, but they keep on clamor for a king. And he uses that for his rhetoric against monarchy. But I believe in a conversation with John Adams, Thomas Paine essentially said that he was lying about using that point, and he didn't actually believe it. So Thomas Paine was the most radical, most rationalist, most liberal person to influence the American founding. He was very, very liberal. His liberal beliefs wasn't just to overthrow the monarchy because of this feeling of the need for liberty and just because of the oppressions they were facing. He wanted to get rid of the monarchy because of his worldview of just tearing everything down, right? This liberal idea of the past is bad, the present is in a crisis, and the future is going to be great. And this was seen in his following the Revolutionary War with his overt support for the French Revolution. In fact, he went to France to support the revolutionaries, the French Revolution that was destroying Catholic churches, was killing Catholic priests and nuns, and beheading people left and right. One of the bloodiest moments in Western history, one of the biggest disasters in Western history, Thomas Paine supported. So Thomas Paine was the most radical person in American history, the most anti-Catholic person, one of the most anti-Catholic persons at the American founding. And he really espoused the liberalism that was there in America.
It's a fascinating story. I've read it, and his I believe it's 1 Samuel chapter 8 is the story you're talking about, where the Israelites demand a king. They demand a king, and God says, "You don't want a king, you want me." And they say, no, God, you don't know what we want. We want a king. And he says, okay, well, if you get a king, you're going to have to run in front of his chariots. You're going to give him a tenth of everything you own, and goes on to tell him. And they still demand a king, which is interesting because eventually Americans demand a king too. They just call him king president. But that's another story for another episode. But yeah, Paine is radical, but Paine didn't do something that Thomas Jefferson did. Thomas Jefferson took out his knife and he cut up the Bible and rebuilt the Bibles. Can you talk a little bit about that and that radicalism? And by the way, I'm a great admirer of Jefferson in many ways, but again, we have to point out his flaws as well, don't we?
Right. I think we can admire these figures in American history without necessarily praising every action they did. Like us, they're flawed human beings, and whether it be due to their own ignorance or in other factors, they held these beliefs that were contradictory to Catholic teaching. And yeah, Jefferson was the biggest example of that through the Jefferson Bible, which was essentially Jefferson's own version of the Bible, where all of the supernatural aspects of Christ were cut out. So instead of Christ being the Son of God and fully man, Christ is just fully man, which is heretical in and itself. So anything such as the resurrection, any of Christ's miracles are just cut out, and Christ is simply reduced to a philosopher like Socrates or Plato. Now, Jefferson did this because he believed that superstition was the thing of the past and that rationalism was the way forward, and that these superstitious beliefs were hindering people's ability to really be free, and we needed to liberate ourselves from these superstitions. So Jefferson was in that camp, and that's why he did it. Jefferson also had these biases against Christians. In some letters he wrote, he really rallied against Christianity and its superstitious beliefs. So Jefferson was just a subscriber more of liberalism, more of these deist values than Washington. I think we could say with certainty that Jefferson was a deist, more than you can say that someone like Washington was a deist. Jefferson was 100% a deist. But at the same time, Jefferson defended America's Christian founding and some of the Christian aspects of the American founding. He defended that. And I think you can say that you cannot understand Jefferson in his politics without a Christian lens and without a Christian worldview. If you're going to read the Declaration of Independence without this idea of a divine creator, then it's essentially a meaningless document. It needs to have a theology animating it. So Jefferson, even the most liberal, or one of the most liberal founding fathers, believed in God and believed in the Christian God. Granted, he had some beliefs that really hindered the full and complete understanding of the Christian God.
Well, he was an incredibly complex and interesting individual. Chopped up the Bible, but as far as I know, was a supporter of the American Bible Society and getting Bibles out to the Native American or the American Indian population and exposing them to the Word of God. So, he kept very meticulous records, but was constantly in bankruptcy or near bankruptcy because he couldn't control his finances. Believed in, was opposed to the idea of slavery in and of itself, and was the first great American to write against slavery, but owned slaves and never was able to free them because he was always close to being impoverished and had to keep them so he could continue to make a living. But to your point, he certainly held Christian beliefs, and he refers to very solid Christian ideals in much of his writing, which always is interesting. I think there was a liberalist author that called him the American Sphinx, if I remember right, and that's probably a true statement. we're not going to have time to hit all of these founding fathers. But Benjamin Franklin's another deist and was very strong, and who knows what he truly believed, because he joked about everything in his writing. Are there any founding fathers that I haven't brought up that you would like to touch on, or can we go on to? I want to talk a little about Maryland and what happens in Maryland. I don't know how into that you are, but thought we could touch on that.
Let's talk about Maryland. I think you could honestly, if you're going to give a diagnosis of the founders and their beliefs, it was very pluralistic, and at the end of the day, it was much more deist. But there's a lot of Christianity there, and it's very different than how other Christian nations were formed. But there is a lot of Christianity involved with the American founding. It's much more different than we understand. And I think the whole point of this project is to bring attention to the founding of America, which is different than the founding of the United States. 1492, October 12th, when Columbus lands, that's a Catholic event, and the missionaries in both the Indies and the mainland United States, by the Spanish and the French, were Catholic. Those were Catholic moments before the British came. So the founding of America is Catholic, and the founding of the United States is much more of this hodgepodge of deism and Protestantism and a little bit of Catholicism and maybe some Freemasonry that we see. But the founding of America is Catholic. That's the whole point of the project, and that's the point that we're trying to drive home.
Well, in 1634, Father Andrew White and the Marylanders hit St. Clement's Island. The first English-led Catholic Mass is said in America, and we're out of time, and I knew this was going to happen. And they find the first English colony in North America that is a Catholic base, and eventually many of them are forced to move on to Kentucky, where they have a St. Mary's County as well, and served, by the way, Maryland stuffed ham in Kentucky. So unfortunately, Michael, we ran out of time here. I really appreciate you coming in. If there's a final word on our founding, what would you make it? Remember, we were Catholic at our very roots.
Yeah, America was Catholic before she was Protestant, and we should really remember that. We should try to build something better because of it.
And remember that our folks up here, most of our audience is in New England. You are in the hotbed of Catholicism in North America today. See you on the other side.